Hello, this is the mid-project update for our space-themed racing game, Come At Me, Bro. I'm Morgan Combs, our team leader, and I'm going to get us started with what we've been busy with. So personally, what I've been busy with, to start off with, was the concept art for our game. I wasn't the only one making concept art, but I made a lot. I made I made the majority of it. Um, this space city you actually see down in the left was actually the first environment that I modeled. it, it's all real fast, and drawing's not really my forte, so it's just trying to get the idea across, and we kind of ended up refining what we've been working on as we were actually making the assets. You might notice in the top right, we had kind of a quirky art style planned, with the outhouse and the CRT monitor up there, but we've actually had a bit of a departure from the art style given our time constraint. It's a lot lower to the ground now. I'm still hoping to, kind of keep some of that essence in there, but with how much, with how close we are getting to the end of the project, we'll see about that. The majority of my concept art though wasn't in the environment, but actually in the ship concept arts. For the most part, I'm not too proud of them, except for this bottom one down here. Um, it's just been kind of like nicknamed the woodpecker or the robin because it kind of looks like a bird with like like a frill on the top of its head. Um, that was the first one that I made, and I liked it, and everybody else liked it enough to where, if you notice over here on the right side, I actually made the 3D model for it, and I don't really anticipate on doing too much more with it, other than uh, getting a game ready and making LODs of it. But it's been kind of the foundation for how I model the other ships. These are some of the models that I made for that first environment. Everything is being uh, modeled by hand, unwrapped and textured all by hand. I think I get about one model done per day, working in 2 to 3 hour sessions. And this is that environment I was talking about. Um, as you can see here, I've got like a path going along where I'd like the track to be. And for the most part, I'm content with where it is. I'd like to, keep adding assets to it, but in order to do that, I wanted to be able to test the track in order to make sure that what I've got is going to be fun to play. But we didn't have a game yet to build, so I actually had to move on to working on the physics before I come back and get to this. And so what we've got here is just like a little test scene for testing our ship physics and movement. We've actually gone through a few iterations of how the ship should move and whatnot, and we're getting close to actually having a final product. The biggest change that still needs to be made is to the camera. Being directly attached to the spaceship, has it feeling real jarring. Uh, the goal, we've been putting a lot of work into this, specifically because, obviously we want operating the ship to feel fun and, just to be fun to play, but we also want it to feel consistent between using a mouse and a keyboard. Um, and so I think we're rapidly approaching a product a product of this that we are going to be happy with. And these are some universal assets that I've been making, just a couple of them. What you see on the right, that model, and the image you see below it, those are both the same asset. That's the starting and finish line. We've been sticking to a consistent color scheme for these, with a lot of yellow and green, just because, those aren't colors that usually show up a whole lot in, space scenes and whatnot. And so we wanted something that would draw attention so that you know where to go, like for the checkpoint on the left. We're hoping that it'll pop a lot more uh, once we get like post-processing and lighting effects in, because you can't really see the lights on the outside anymore. Finally, for the future that I'll be working on for the second half of the project, uh, last will be post-processing effects, cell shading, getting, like an outline effect on objects, and some details, lens flare, color correction, motion blur, maybe a little bit of bloom. We'll have to see about that last one. Uh, I'm definitely going to be making more spaceship models. We have a whole customization screen that, um, for players to choose what ship and color they use. So we're going to need, that's going to be something that I'm going to have to flesh out. Um, at least one more level. Ryan's been actually working on a level as well, so that kind of takes a bit of the pressure off of me. And multiplayer. Uh, what I mean by that is just implementation for split screen. Right now, single player, using the mouse uses the entire screen space, and so uh, when we get to having multiplayer along with the AI, then that's going to be something I'm going to have to spearhead. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Ryan.
So to begin talking about something, I want to talk about our decision and time allocation. Because one thing we heavily focused on was education first, so that would be less hassle later. We decided to focus majority of our time up front on figuring out how Unity works, how we can better develop inside of Unity, and what type of components we want to use. So that way we can avoid disastrous mistakes like this. Youch. One of the other things that we have to present during this midpoint is part of our second environment. Here is a brief little video clip on what the environment currently looks like and how we're running with it. It's mostly just a layout at this point, but we are looking at expanding into it and developing it further on. This will be running as a figure eight style type, almost death ring, where players will be going essentially intercrossing each other as they're playing and trying to survive the environment, as well as just trying to cut corners as much as they can to get to the first place without running into asteroids or into other players and or fighting other players. Another little development section that we have to present for is our UI welcome screen and a UI menu screen. Those are some different things that I developed. We have it so where when you're able to click on things, it interchanges the sprite, so that way the player knows exactly what they're hovering over without no question about what it will do or how it's done. Or here's a quick little demonstration of just interacting with the menu screen, how it will look and run and feel. Now let's just take a quick little dive into the software requirement specifications, or the SRS, because it's where all the nice gritty bones are. Here we're going to take a quick look at the UI layout coming straight from the document. Currently right now we have majority of the inner structure of the UI menu built, including the welcome screen, main menu screen. We're working on leaderboards and settings currently, as well as getting the player menu all sorted out. We also started looking at different started gameplays and just integrating that into the different map selections areas. Now, a good question to ask ourselves is, why such a heavy focus on the UI right now? To quote one of my previous professors, you need to build a house before you put the windows in it. Which that can be easily interpreted down, reading down into the fact that we want to have a nice outer working development environment, so when you launch the game, it's all polished and clean. And as soon as we start having races we're able to start play testing things out without having to walk people through on how to use it. It also just gives a more general vibe and just gets a good starting spot for ourselves. Some of the things that I'm looking at for future development-wise is just continued development in the second environment, as well as building onto a checkpoint systems for the general racing conditions, and also just constructing the general finish line conditions to help progress the race, and that can be used across multiple environments and levels.
My name is Stephanie Russell, and for my portion of the project, I wanted to talk briefly about my time allocation. Like many of the other members of the team, I took a lot of time to research and learn about the programs we were working with. I had absolutely zero experience with Unity or the Amazon database. I started to learn Unity by creating a small-scale game where a user can move a block around and turn on and off a flashlight. This helped me to see how we can use that to create in-game mechanics. My current tasks I focused on were the race registration, profile menus, and creating or connecting the database to these UIs. For the Dynamo database, this was the most challenging for me because it's a NoSQL database. So typical querying and insert statements just don't exist. It took 2 to 3 weeks for me to actually learn the database. I created tables, read APIs, and watched endless tutorials on how to access data. My current task was to transition our first database, which was in SQLite, to the Dynamo database, and thankfully our task is complete. Now, I won't bore you of the details of our database. This is just a brief overview of the schematics of our database. The Player 2 table is for future multiplayer expansion that we would like to add if time allows. And now on to the demo. Alright, so this is the profile menu. On the profile menu we have new profile, edit profile, and back. So let's make a new profile. So right here I'm going to enter the name Steph123 and I'll hit submit, and you can see that it's been added to the database. Alright, let's make one more. You hit submit and you can see the same message has popped up but just a different name. Now if you try to hit submit again, the program will catch that the username cats already exists in the database. Alright, so let's edit our profile now. So right here you're going to enter in the name that you want to change, and down here is the name that you want it to, the new name that you want it to be. Alright, so when I hit submit, you can see cats has been updated to dogs in the database. So now if I try to hit submit again, you can see that cats does not exist in the database. The reason why cats does not exist is because we already overwritten it with the name dogs. Okay, so let's change this around a bit. Alright, so if I want to change dogs to Steph123 and I hit submit, you can see that Steph123 already exists in the database, so it will not create a new record. Okay, let's change it up one more time. When I hit submit, you can see that dogs has been updated to dogs 123 in the database. Alright, and that is the profile menu section. Alright, so moving forward, for the future, I would like to integrate the Amazon database to all required UI menus. For example, one menu I'd like to add it to is the customization menu. I want to create a pause menu for gameplay that would allow the user to pause the game if they wanted to. I also want to create in-game mechanics. That would include switching weapons on your ship, picking up items, interacting with items, etc. I also want to add more robust tests to our menus and game mechanics so we can find bugs or possibly future features to add.
So, something that we had talked about as a group pretty early on was that we wanted the UI to be very well thought out. So, no matter what you're doing in the game, you're going to have UI elements to look at, and we really wanted those to be unique, but also feel right for the style that we were going for. Going back to what Ryan had quoted, we had to build the house before we could put any windows inside, so that's the task I spent the majority of my time on for the first half of this class. My main goal was to make sure that we kept the user interface predictable between different menus, because having the button layout switch from center aligned in one menu to then left aligned in a different one, or just even having no concise layout at all, wouldn't make navigation very easy or very enjoyable for any end user. On top of getting a good layout, adding some animations to the elements of each menu was pretty important because we needed to give each scene a little bit of life. Since there are multiple people working on the UI at any given time, there were originally a lot of disparities between how certain elements looked. So, like, Ryan's menus had some small variations compared to what my menus look like, but my menus had some small variations compared to what Stephanie's menus look like. So some buttons would be larger or smaller than others, and some buttons wouldn't scale text properly, and the animations didn't match, and it was a mess. Because of this, I moved ahead with creating prefabs of any of the important UI elements, mainly buttons. This way, anytime someone needed to add a common UI element, such as a button, to their menu, the prefab would make sure that the animations, the sounds, and the text scaling and sprite scaling were all the same. And if anyone needed to change something, the prefab could be directly modified to fit certain needs, or one of the underlying scripts could be changed, and then any instance would follow any of those edits. This really made the process of creating the UI much faster and a lot more unified than it was previously. So here's a small demonstration of what the UI and prefabs look like in action. So each button is a prefab which follows the original settings that we set, but some of these can be modified in certain ways to fit a specific purpose. So this made it really easy to create text selectors that are in like the bot setup menu, as there are prefabs nested in other prefabs. So prefabception, as you could say. As for the UI as a whole, everything is pretty predictable. Center-aligned elements that have matching animations, with the back button always being placed at the bottom of the screen. You might notice that the overall layout isn't quite perfect between each menu, especially with the menu header position, but that's something that I'm going to be tweaking over the next 3 months to hopefully get things a little more perfect. Along with fixing some small UI alignment, some missing sprites need to be created to fill gaps in UI element styling, most notably text boxes. Some sprite variants also need to have their scaling issues resolved to prevent awkward stretching. A big item on my future list is to completely rework the customization menu. Morgan and I had talked about removing the player model requirement so he wasn't overloaded on the amount of models he had to create. So instead, the menu is going to be repurposed into ship customization only, which works perfectly because the customization menu is intended to have ship customization anyways. Aside from that, I'll be moving towards creating the race UI for displaying important race info, and also doing more testing on music and game sounds. Finally, I'll be working on linking all the front-end UI to back-end data, as well as getting persistent data across menus so that everything actually works as it's supposed to.